something on the order of I don't know, maybe like 10 lines, 10 skinny lines, but it's really juicy, so I'm really excited about it. Last week's class, rather, I promised that we would say a word about this funky word called Pruzbol. So I put just the gastro at the top of this week's handout. So now hopefully you've had enough time to get that open, because as I mentioned, we're going to be spending quite a lot of time in the handout. So the gastro puts in, it's an abbreviation of these 3 words in Greek that I'm going to butcher. My husband is the Greek expert in our house, but it's something like Pruzbol. And then if you follow where gastro tells you to go, which is butius, it means something like a senator. So then Pruzbol, which is Pruzbol, something like that, means before the council of senators, which is still confusing. That doesn't really account for why it's called a Pruzbol, other than if you imagine that the council of senators is the Gittin, then what you're doing is you're saying, I have this outstanding loan, the Shemitah year is coming, and I would like to pass my loan off to the Gittin as the holder of the loan, so that I can enforce it going forward. So I think that's probably the idea behind the word Pruzbol. It has this Greek root, but if there's anyone, any of the participants in our Shiur who have brilliant ideas about that, Noah, I know you're a linguist, and other people, feel free to chime in if you have thoughts or a better understandings of the Greek and what might be going on here. Okay, but with that, let's go back to our Gemara, and if people have other thoughts and ideas, they're welcome to share them. And by the way, I think Evie mentioned this, but we do kind of welcome people to turn on their videos and show your face. It's nice to know that people are kind of listening. So feel free to do that. And also I should mention, I'm trying out a new audio setup, as you can see here. So if it gets really loud, or I don't know, if something goes wrong with it, just please let me know. But we got some complaints last time, so I'm trying to up my game. Okay, so if you're inside your Gemara, we are on page Lamed Vav Amud Bet, and we're the 3rd line down from the top of the page. So as I mentioned, right, we had our first question, which was is there such a thing that on a Torah level, Shemitah requires it? Let's say it's a requirement of Shemitah, and then Hillel can come along and decree that it's not a requirement of Shemitah. What a crazy thing. And then we saw, just to review, right, we saw the position of Rebbe, who says that Shemitah Bizman Hazeh is, Rebbe filtered through Abaye, saying that Shemitah in our times is derabanan, and therefore you can have, and therefore the rabbis are allowed to kind of make this loophole, because you can have a rabbinic innovation of Pruzbol on a rabbinic level of Shemitah. That's kind of the argument here. And then, but that's a little bit complicated, because now the Gemara is going to ask the following question. Randy, I think, doesn't have the source sheet. Evie's posted it a few times, so maybe she'll post it again in case someone joins, since the last time she posted it. Okay, so now we're up to the next question, which is, hold on. Okay, so let's say that Shemitah is only derabanan, meaning on a Torah level, I don't have to, the lender, we can go back to our case from last time where I lent Evie $1 million. So Evie owes me $1 million. So now we have a case where on a Torah level, Evie still owes me $1 million. Here's the Gemara's question. Is it possible that there's such a thing where on a Torah level, Shemitah doesn't release it, right? We said that that's maybe even the root of the word Shemitah we talked about last time is this release, that on a Torah level, Shemitah doesn't release it. And then the rabbis come along and release it. And that's a really good question, because here's the Rashi, ve'imor Rabbanan detishamit. So if you are in the handout or in source number 2, but if you're in Rashi, we're 3 lines down in the Rashi, v'nimtza halove gazlan al pihem, right? So if on a Torah level, Evie owes me $1 million, but then on a rabbinic level, they say, oh, but actually on a rabbinic level, Evie doesn't owe me $1 million. Then along comes this question and says, how is that possible? And explains Rashi, v'nimtza halove, Evie, Evie, the borrower, is going to be a gazlan al pihem, a thief, but who's acting like in accordance with the rabbinic decision, right? So Evie is going to be stealing $1 million from me by following rabbinic will. So meaning it's crazy to say on a Torah level, Evie owes me $1 million, but on a rabbinic level, she's allowed to keep it, because then on a Torah level, by her keeping it, she's stealing from me. Is that right? Are people following what I'm saying? That even though the rabbis say, oh, Evie, you can keep it, well, if the Torah says she can't keep it and has to actually return her loan, then on a Torah level, Evie's a thief, even if the rabbis are encouraging her to steal. So that's the Gemara's next question, right? The first question was, how is Hillel allowed to override the Torah? But the second question is, once we say, oh no, actually Shemitah is just a derabanan, they say, actually Shemitah today is just a derabanan, then it almost, like, I don't know whether it's like more of a question or it's like the opposite question or something in that direction, right? If it's just the derabanan, then Evie needs to repay the loan, because loans are serious, right? So that's our question. So we have 2 answers. One answer by Abaye and one answer by Rava. A confusing thing that I just want to point out is that Abaye was kind of already speaking. So if we turn back the page, or if you look at last week's handout, or you can just listen, we had our first question, which was, is there possible that there's such a thing that the Shemitah releases on a Torah level, and then Hillel can just come along and make a Pruzbol? And so then we have Abaye, who says, Amar Abaye, b'shvit b'zman hazeh v'Rebbe. And then we go into Rebbe's opinion, and that's like what we saw so far, kind of, right? And Rebbe's opinion is that Shemitah now is derabanan. And so now we have this second question. It just seems like it's a second question based on Abaye's answer, right? So Abaye says, oh, I can resolve it. I can resolve the first question by saying that Shemitah is derabanan. And now we have question number 2, which says that, no, actually, let's say Shemitah is derabanan, that still raises some really big problems. Okay, so now what does Abaye say to this question number 2? Amar Abaye, shave the alta sahu. Abaye says, this is a case where you should sit and let it pass. Sit and do nothing. So now we're going to look on this opinion of Abaye before we move on to Rava. So it's very tricky here, because what it looks like is that on question number 2, we have a question, we have an answer of Abaye and the answer of Rava. That's a very normal structure of a thing. Abaye and Rava are what we often call bar plugta. They're people who argue with each other all the time. It's very sweet, actually. The Gemara has stories about them. They had the same teacher. They were both students of Rabbah. And there's stories about like what their childhood Beit Midrash looked like, that Rabbah would ask, like the Gemara tells the story, like Rabbah would ask them a question, where is Hashem? And Rava would just like point up to the rafters, but Abaye would like run outside and Hashem is here. And there, a lot of people feel like this is very like indicative of their different jurisprudential kind of personalities. Even there's I heard a shiur one time by Rabbi Eli Fisher, who used that story to argue that Abaye had ADD or ADHD even, it was actually pretty compelling. I think you can probably find it online somewhere. Anyway, so it seems like we have a question, we have an answer by Abaye, we have an answer by Rava. But I don't want you to fall into that trap, because actually we had a statement by Abaye, we had a question, a statement by Abaye, and then a question on the statement by Abaye, and now we have Abaye's defense. So when we get to Rava, we're going to have to ask ourselves, which question is Rava answering? Is Rava answering that original question, question number one, of is how could Hillel have made Pruzbol at all? Or is he answering question number two, absorbing the assumption of Rebbe that Shemitah is the Rabbanan, and then actually answering this question, which Abaye is about to answer, right? So that's just our like structural point. I'll repeat it again once we get to the opinion of Rava, but I wanted to kind of introduce it that way. But Abaye is clearly answering question number two, because that's an easy structure, right? Question number one, Abaye's answer. Question number two, on Abaye's answer, and now Abaye's like final defense. So Abaye's final defense is, oh, the reason why it's not problematic for the rabbis to release a loan that on a Torah level still stands is because it's a Sheva al Taseh. Okay, so the Sheva al Taseh, sit and do nothing, right? That's the translation of Sheva al Taseh. So the first question is, who is the person who's sitting and doing nothing? Is it Evie sitting and doing nothing by not repaying my loan? Or is it me sitting and doing nothing by not coming after Evie and trying to extract the money from her through some kind of legal force situation, right? So that's the first question on this. So here's the Rashi on Rava. It's underlined in the, if you're in the source sheet, and if you're in the Gemara, it's like 4 lines down from once it gets skinny. Five lines down from once it gets skinny. Okay, so here's Rashi Sheva al Taseh. The halove hazeh, so that's Evie. Evie is the love. The borrower, this borrower, Shiv will sit, uvatal, and he'll do nothing. Ve'eno osa ha-mitzvah, and he, it's in the, whatever, you'll imagine Evie into his masculine language. Ve'eno osa ha-mitzvah lifroa chova, when he doesn't do the mitzvah of repaying his debt. V'lo akarle beyadayim, and he doesn't like undo something with his hands. V'chi gavna, and similar. So we're gonna dig in a second to what it means. Like he didn't undo it with his hands, because Rashi's gonna bring examples. Ki gavna mutar la'akor davar min haTorah, and situations like this where you don't have to undo it with your hands, you're allowed to uproot something from the rabbis are allowed to uproot something from the Torah. So what are examples of that? The examples are very, very strong. Shofar, velulav, v'domehen. So what does that mean? If you open, I didn't bring you the Gemara in Yevamot because it doesn't really add to what Rashi tells you. I'll just tell you what it means. On a Torah level, you're supposed to blow shofar even when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. But as you might know, we do not blow shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos for all sorts of reasons. We think maybe people will practice, maybe people will carry it, maybe they won't be prepared, all whatever, a million different reasons why we don't blow shofar when the first day of Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat. It's impossible for the second day of Rosh Hashanah to fall on Shabbat, just as I'm saying it. That is a situation where it seems like the rabbi said, yes, this is a Torah level obligation, but we're going to uproot it. And how we're going to uproot it is through a Sheva al Taseh. Yep, you're just like, it's a mitzvah to say in the Torah, it's a positive commandment to do the thing, but you're just going to not do it. And similar to lulav, right? So lulav on the first day is Torah level. You're supposed to do it. You're supposed to take lulav on the first day, even if it falls on Shabbat. And similar to shofar, the rabbi said, nope, that's too risky. We're not going to have you. You're going to break Shabbos in all these other ways. It's going to be really bad. We're going to have you not take lulav on the first days. And the same question, how is it possible? The Torah commands you to take lulav on the first days. You should take lulav on the first days. And the answer is, it's a Sheva al Taseh, sit and don't do it. And that, I think, is part of what motivates Rashi to say that it's on Evie, that Evie has a positive commandment to repay her debt, and she's just going to sit it out. Sheva al tasa, she's going to sit it out. As opposed to if it were on me, where like maybe I have actually like a shmita it's like it would like violate shmita for me. Like there's maybe more of like a low tasa involved for me. I think that's what's motivating Rashi to say the Sheva al tasa is actually on Evie, who's just gonna like sit tight and not do anything. And the reason why you're allowed to do it is because it's not that you're saying, oh, you're gonna do the opposite of what's commanded, or that you're gonna just completely uproot some kind of commandment. Rashi says, "Delo akira beyadayim." It's not like you're uprooting it with your hand. The rabbis are not uprooting any law with their hands. They're just saying, Evie, stay home, enjoy your $1 million. So that's Abaye's answer according to Rashi for how it's possible the rabbis can tell Evie, like be a thief, basically. No, you're not being a thief. You're just staying home, says Rashi. Okay, so now turn to source number 7. I'm sorry, we're gonna come back to the Rashba in order for the second half of it, but we're gonna look here at the first half of it. So turn to source number 7 on page 4. On page 4, source number 7. Sorry. Okay, source number 7 on page 4. We're in the Chidushay Harashba. So the Rashba asks, right? That's our Gemara's question. Is there such a thing that on a Torah level is not released, i.e., the loan is not released, but the rabbis declared that it decreed that it should be released? Nearly, says the Rashba, that because everyone wants to be able to say, I'm releasing it, I'm keeping Shemitah, have a svirale lamakshe tahainu akira ve'ino sheval taseh. Then it seems to the question asker, to the stam who says, mi gamide dimido right to lo mishamta talk to Rabbanit to shamit, that it's actually it's actually uprooting that this mitzvah d'Rabbanan is actually uprooting a deoraita obligation for Evie to repay her loan. That it's not a sheva al taseh because we're uprooting an obligation. Lefichach Amar Abaye, and therefore Abaye says sheva al taseh. Who? Abaye is not saying it's a she. You'll see why I'm reading it that way in a second. Abaye is not saying it's a sheva al taseh case. Abaye says he should sit and not collect the loan, the malva. The lo kalmar shiva al taseh shani, right? Because if it wanted to say it's in general a shiva al taseh, then it would have said, oh yeah, that's a good question, but shiva al taseh makes the case different. And instead it says shiva al taseh who klomar in za ela shiva al taseh she'eni kara davar ela she'omrim lezeh al tigabeh chuvcha. So that, right, the point, the main ikar hadavar, the main element of what's happening here is that they say to the malveh, they meaning the creators of the Pruzbol, for example, say to the malveh, like, don't go collect your loan unless you make a Pruzbol. So the shiva al taseh is only, we have to make sure that we're clear on the case in order for this to make sense, right? The rabbinic innovation is actually not that Evie should just stay home and hang out. The rabbinic innovation is that I shouldn't collect my loan. I, the lender, should not go collect my loan, asterisk, unless I make a Pruzbol. That's an important piece to read into the Rashba, right? What's actually the rabbinic innovation? The rabbinic innovation is if you want to collect your loan, go make a Pruzbol, right? And then the question is, hold on, but who needs a Pruzbol? Evie has to repay the loan if it's all Rabbanan. And the answer is the shiva al taseh is when if I don't make a Pruzbol, then they're telling me, Leah, stay home, don't go collect your money. Really, Evie owes it to you, but you're not going to go collect it. And he says, V'Rashi zal piresh be'inyan acher. Rashi was explaining something else, which is his way of saying, I disagree with Rashi, which is fine. But he's saying, no, the shiva al taseh is on the lender. the lender is supposed to not collect their loan unless they make a Pruzbol, and that's who's supposed to sit and do nothing. The lender who didn't make a Pruzbol is supposed to sit and do nothing, according to Abaye's answer. Okay, that's the amount of investigation we're going to do into Abaye, because I'm very excited about Rava's answer. So we're going to put Abaye to the side unless there's anyone who has questions about Abaye. Okay, I want to keep going on to Rava then. But okay, so just to review, right, the position of Abaye in totality is, how could Hillel have made Pruzbol? Doesn't the Torah say to make Pruzbol? And then Abaye says, no, it's just a derabanan. Then the Gemara says, hold on, but if it's just a derabanan, then Evie has to repay. And Abaye says, no, because with Pruzbol, we're telling Leah, stay home and don't collect. Evie still has to repay, but Leah needs to go and collect. Says Rashi. It says Rashba. That's the Rashba's read. Leah has to go and Evie still has to pay, but Leah shouldn't go and collect unless she makes a Pruzbol. That's the Rashba read. And the Rashi read is, basically Abaye is saying, yes, good question, but the rabbis are totally allowed to do that. And it's just like them uprooting lulav on Shabbos and shofar on Shabbos. And Evie is just not supposed to repay. So Rashi is putting the Rashba read, I think, is like a very reasonable kind of read of what's going on here, that the lender is the one who's supposed to stay home, and then you get a backdoor of a Pruzbol. The Rashi read is saying, this Rabbanit is crazy. It's as crazy as telling people not to bench lulav on Shabbos. It's a true flex of rabbinic power. Tell Evie to stay home. Right? Rashi is reading a lot of strength into Abaye's position in a way that Rashba much less, I think. Okay, so let's move on to Rava, and we're going to talk about Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker. But before we talk about Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker, we have to understand that there's two ways to read, and I said this already. I preluded this, but I think it's a little bit complicated, so I want to say it again. There's two ways to read Rava's approach here, Rava's Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker. Approach one is question number one, Abaye's answer. Question number two, Abaye's answer, Rava's answer. That's framework number one for how to understand where Rava comes into this. Option number two is question number one, Abaye's answer, question on Abaye, Abaye's answer. Question number one, Rava's answer. Does that second chart, that kind of makes sense, right? We have one question, Abaye had his chance at answering it, and now it's Rava's chance at answering it. So, right, so when Rava says Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker, there's a question of what question is Rava responding to? And Rashi is going to say on Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker, maybe both. That's like the fascinating thing about Rava's answer, is that it's a very strong answer and that it can actually really accommodate for both questions. So so we can read inside, right? Rava Amar Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker. Okay, now we read inside. Let's look at the Rashi that says Rava Amar. Okay. L'olam bin l'Rabbanan depligei ad Rabbi v'amrei shvi'it v'hashmatat malve b'zman hazeh de'oraita v'takin Hillel de'lo tishamit bin l'Rebbe de'amar lav de'oraita v'imor Rabbanan de'tishamit. Okay, one second. Sorry. Okay, so Rashi says it could actually be both. Whether it's the rabbis who argue against Rebbe and they say, no, Shvi'it for the purposes of releasing, for the purposes of requiring lenders to release loans in this time is actually still the Oraita. And Hillel came along and says, don't do that. That's option number one. Or there's Rebbe's opinion who says it's not the Oraita. And the rabbis say, that actually you should right. Oh, and it's actually the rabbis who say, yeah, you should actually keep Shemitah on a rabbinic level, right? So So he spells it out, because really inside we only ever saw the opinion of Rebbe, who says that Shemitah Bisman Hazeh is Rabbanan, but Rashi is bringing in like this other opinion which says no, Shemitah Bisman Hazeh is Doraita, and he says Rava could be answering, Rava could be addressing either of those things, which means that he could be addressing question number 1 or question number 2. And he says, "Lo tikshe davar, don't have a problem with any of this. The bedavar shebemamon, because when it comes to monetary matters, in kan akirat davar min haTorah, we're not uprooting any Torah level thing. Bimkom siag v'geder the hefker beitin b'mamon hefker, because and we're not making some kind of and we're not necessarily making some kind of like fence or anything like that, because hefker beitin." When a beitin declares something to be hefker, to be ownerless, it can declare eminent domain, right? That's how we would say it today. When a beitin declares something to be ownerless, when that thing is monetary, it is declared ownerless. And so here, let's just play that out, how it could be a response to either question. So if it's question number 1, and the question is, how is it possible that Hillel invented Pruzbol when on a Torah level, Shemitah requires me to release the loan? The answer is hefker beitin hefker. It works on a deoraita level. Hefker beitin hefker is a deoraita concept. The beitin can declare money to be ownerless at any time, however they please, no problem. So that's that direction. But if we follow the direction in which Rava is arguing with Abaye about the answer to the second question, which is, isn't Evie a thief for not repaying me if it's all on a derabanan level? Then the answer again could be hefker beitin hefker. No, Evie's not a thief, because the Evie's owing me money has been transferred to the beitin, and the beitin has decided that I'm not owed money anymore by Evie. So the beitin can just reallocate funds, even funds, or especially funds not in their possession, and that works. So it's not that Evie's stealing from me, because the beitin has taken the money from me and allocated it to Evie, or the beitin now owns the loan. If I did a Pruzbol, and the beitin's just allowed to do that. So whether you think Shemitah Bisman Hazeh is the right and you think Rava is responding to the first question, or you're on team Shemitah Bisman Hazeh Rabbanan and Rava is responding to the second question, either way, hefker beitin hefker is like this very strong approach. Okay, so where does hefker beitin hefker come from? We have a lot of questions about hefker beitin hefker. Where does it come from? Who's allowed to do it? Is any beitin allowed to do it? Is this a thing that Batei Din are still allowed to do today? What is the strength of hefker beitin hefker? So a question hefker beitin hefker would be, let's say the beitin can take away $1 million from me. Can they actually then reallocate that $1 million to Evie, or they can just take it away from me, right? Are they allowed to just like take from whoever they want, give it to whoever they want, or is it just that they're only allowed to take from people? So we have a lot of questions about hefker beitin hefker. Hopefully the next half an hour will be plenty of time to get a first look at many of them. Okay, so we're going to look at two other Gemara texts that describe hefker beitin hefker. But before we do that, let's actually look at the psukim in our Gemara. So, right, we have Rava Amar hefker beitin hefker. Where does it come from? The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Minayin shehefker beitin hefker. From where do we know that hefker beitin is hefker? That the beitin can declare things ownerless and it works. Shana Amar, and then we're gonna quote from Ezra, and we'll look at this Ezra inside in a moment. V'chol asher lo yavo lishloshet hayamim keitzad hasarim v'azkinim yacheram kol rechusho v'hu yavdel mi-badel mi-kahal hagola. So anyone who doesn't come for these 3 days at the advice of the sages and the officers, all of their property will be yacheram, will be confiscated. And I just lost my place. And this person, the person who didn't show up, will be separated from the community the community that has returned from the exile. Okay, so that's option number one, right? It's this idea that if you don't show up, we're going to take away all your stuff. That really kind of sounds like hefker beitin hefker. Don't show up, we're going to take away all your stuff. That does not give us any indication as to whether I can repurpose that stuff. Like, okay, so the beitin took away $1 million from me, doesn't tell me whether the beitin's allowed to give that $1 million to Evie. Okay. And then here's option number two. Rabbi Eliezer Amar mi hacha. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, we don't learn it from there. We learn it from here. Ela hanachalot asher nachalu Elazar hakohen v'Yoshua ben Nun b'roshei ha'avot v'gomer. These are the inheritances which were inherited by Elazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun and the heads of the tribes, etc. And we'll see that inside also. This is in the book of Joshua. And the Gemara says, "V'chi ma'anyan rashim etzel avot." What is the relationship to these heads and to these patriarchs? Why does it say roshei ha'avot? Right, that's basically the question of the Gemara here. Well, Malach to tell you, ma ha'avot manchilim et b'neihem, just as fathers pass on inheritance to their sons, kol masha yirtzu, whatever they want to inherit to their children, they'll do. Af roshim manchilim ha'am kol masha yirtzu. So too, heads can inherit to the people whatever they want to inherit. So this is much less about taking and much more about bequeathing, right? I can bequeath whatever I want. So this doesn't actually tell me anything about who I can take from, but it tells me everything about who I can reappropriate to. So we have this kind of question of, are Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Eliezer actually arguing? Because in some ways you kind of need both, right? Rabbi Yitzchak is all about, oh, the Beit Din can take stuff. Rabbi Eliezer is all about, oh, well, the Beit Din's sitting on stuff, it can give it away. So maybe actually when Rava is saying hefker Beit Din hefker, and here's my proof, the proof requires both the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak and the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Because hefker Beit Din hefker, well, that's actually an interesting thing. Does hefker Beit Din hefker, when it comes to Pruzbol, actually require both taking and giving? Maybe it only requires taking. It certainly requires taking, and we don't have clarity on that totally yet. But it does a little bit seem like the fact that in Pruzbol, it gives the Beit Din it gives the Beit Din the loan, but what the Beit Din is doing is collecting my loan from Evie and then giving it to me, or even empowering me to collect my loan straight from Evie. It does seem like hefker Beit Din hefker by Pruzbol really does require both. Like you need a much more creative model of how hefker Beit Din hefker worked, or how hefker Beit Din hefker like is the force behind Pruzbol. If hefker Beit Din hefker only can do one or the other, can only give or can only take but not give. So Gabriel asked if they were to take without giving, what would happen to the money? So maybe the money would automatically, maybe it would go to like Beit Din fees or costs. Criminal justice systems require an incredible amount of money. So it would cover those costs. I don't know. Or maybe the property would maybe have to be destroyed. Like there's lots of potential options there for if I took something. I mean, we have whole categories of things that are like prohibited and benefit. They're isurei hana'ah. And so then, right, always the question is, well, now I have this thing, it's isur hana, what am I supposed to do with it? And oftentimes the Mishnah will say, throw it into Yam HaMelach, like throw it into the Dead Sea. Can't get any benefit from it, can't do anything with it. So that's, that type of thing would be an option if they could take but not give. Sometimes it's sort of like, take it and sit on it until Messiah comes. Like sometimes the Beit Din, if they don't know what to do with something, they just sit on it. Also, like I think there are really lots of potential options, but I don't know how taking without giving would, or what I don't understand would be how taking without giving would affect the Pruzbol. So that's what I feel a little bit confused about. And similarly, right, like how giving without taking makes any sense at all. Like, is it really possible to read Rabbi Eliezer's position to be, like God gave it to them so then they could give it out, but that doesn't mean that they can actually take from other people. Also, like, how would the words hefker beit and hefker possibly mean that? Okay, Tracy says we only need one side taking or giving. If the problematic thing is only the lendees not paying or the lenders not giving up their right to collect. Right. Okay. Yeah. I think what Tracy's saying makes sense here. So but Tracy, I guess my point is that in a Pruzbol, what the Gittin is doing is saying, okay, like we, at least in, I think at least in Rava's understanding of what a Pruzbol does, and we looked last week at the language of the Pruzbol, and basically, here's a Pruzbol. I hereby turn over to you, judges, in this place, all of the debts owed to me. So I give them the debt, and whether or not the debts are evidenced in writing, so that I may therefore collect these debts at any time that I desire. So that means that now Evie owes the Gittin instead of me. And so then that gives me the right to lender's not right. So it gives me the right to collect my payment because I'm the one who's not allowed to have it. And so the Gittin then absorbs it, but the Gittin as like a body is yes allowed to have it. And I guess like if hefker Gittin is what enables them to be like, yes, we're allowed to have it, and we now release it to Leah. So they are at least giving it to me. I guess that would be a case maybe if Evie pays the Gittin of her own free will. They don't have to collect it through hefker Gittin hefker, but they release it back to me through hefker Gittin hefker. Right? Okay, Tracy shkoyach. Okay, fine. So now we're just going to look at two other cases of hefker Gittin hefker. So we have in Yavamu 87b, it's a pretty yucky case if I'm being honest. I just want to like warn you in advance. So we're talking about a minor girl, she's minor, she's a girl. She was married off to some man by not her father, but her sister or her brother. So presumably her father is dead. And then the question is like, who inherits her when she dies while she's still a minor? So we're in the middle of a conversation that's not exactly about that, but Shalach le Rav Chisda le Rabba biyad Rav Acha bar Rav Huna ve'in beitnin matanin la'akor davar min haTorah. So Rav Chisda sends to Rabba in the hand of Rav Acha bar Rav Huna, says, can the court not stipulate to uproot something that's prohibited by Torah law? Don't we have the following brayta v'atanya me'imat hayadam yorish et ishto ktana? From when does a man inherit his minor wife? And she, again, was married off by her mother or her brother, which is a derabanan level marriage, but not a deoraita level marriage. I should have mentioned that from the beginning. So she's in a derabanan marriage, but it's not effective deoraita. And then the question is, well, she dies, who inherits her? Because there's like a deoraita, like chain of inheritance. And that presumably wouldn't include her derabanan husband. Okay. So from when does he inherit her? Right, so that's the brayta batana me'imat hayadam yorish ishto ktana. Beit Shammai umrim misha Talmud bekumata. Beit Shammai say when she's reached her like full height. So maybe that's like a sign of adulthood. Beit Hillel umrim misha tikanes lechupa. And Hillel say no. He inherits her from when they get this, when they effectuate this derabanan marriage. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Misha Tziba'el, and Rabbi Eliezer says from when they consummate the marriage, V'yorsha U'metamela V'ochelet Begino Truma, and he inherits from her. He becomes, if he's a Kohen, he'll become impure for her if she dies, even if he's a Kohen. And similarly, if he's a Kohen and she's not a Kohen, and then she marries him, she can eat Truma because of him, on account of him. But then so in the Gemara, we like skipped some parts here, but then the Gemara says, Tani Miha Yarsha, it says that the Brayta teaches that the husband inherits her, but on the Torah level, her birth family, her father, who presumably is dead, should inherit her, and the husband only inherits her on this derabanan level. How is that possible? Asks the Gemara, and the answer is hefker beitzin hefker. The answer is that the rabbis are allowed to essentially confiscate property from her family of birth, and give it to her family of marriage through hefker beitzin hefker. Right? They just seize the property and give it to the husband. And then we have our exact sources. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Minai Hefker Beitzin Hefker Shneimar, right? Exactly our sources from Ezra, and then we also have Rabbi Elazar's opinion with our sources from Yehoshua, and that exact same reasoning about the sources from Yehoshua. Kimanyan Roshim et Alavot Alomarlach Ma'avot Manchilim B'neiam Kol Mashirtzu Af Roshim Manchilim et Ha'am Kol Mashirtzu, and that's about the gifting part of it. So it's not just about the taking from the father's family, it's also about the reappropriation of the funds to the husband's family. So that's in Yevamot. So before we see the third source, the third Gemara source that quotes these, which is source number 6, let's just look a little bit inside. Now that we've seen these sources twice already, probably makes sense to look at these sources in Ezra and Yehoshua. So we're going to do that real fast. Okay, so okay. Basically, I'm just going to tell you the Ezra thing outside. In Ezra, everyone is intermarrying, and Ezra really hates it. Right? So Ezra is the times of Shivat Zion, the return to Israel after the first exile. Ezra is one of the people who leads the return, and he is very frum, and he really hates intermarriage, and everyone who's there is intermarrying, and he thinks this is a really big problem, and he says, what should we do about it? Everyone has intermarried, and they say, let's bring everyone to, let's gather everyone, and let's make a whole big thing. And anyone who doesn't come, we're gonna assume like they've chosen to like stay with their intermarried spouse, their non-Jewish wife. That's really what it is. We're gonna assume they've chosen to stay with their non-Jewish wife, and we're gonna kick them out of their community. So another time on all the like intermarriage resonances between like responses in the times of Ezra and responses today. But the idea is that for our purposes, the idea is that the leaders of the community have this power to take away all of someone's wealth and then kick them out of the community, which is in and of itself, today we might see people trying to kick people out of the community, but they don't have the right to like seize their bank accounts on the way to doing that. And that's definitely what you should be imagining into these Ezra texts. Okay, so that's Ezra. And then in Yehoshua, what we have here is it's the end of a long parak about all of that. I mean, you can tell, right? Because we're in verses 48 to 51. That's a pretty long parak. And it's all about the allocations of land to each tribe. And so, right, this is the portion of the tribe of Dan by their clans, towns, villages, and then, right, so they had finished allotting the land according to its boundaries, and then they're like, wait, Yehoshua, we want to give you like this special piece of land just for you, which is kind of sweet. Al pi Hashem natnulo et ha'ir asher sha'al. So they gave him the city that he asked for, which is Timnat Serach, in the mountain of Ephraim, and he built himself a city and he lived there. Elah nachalot asher nachalu Elazar kohen Yoshua ben Nun v'roshei ha'avot lematot b'nei Yisrael begoral b'shilo lifnei Hashem patach ol moed v'yachalu mechalik et haaretz. And then we have this kind of like summary statement. These are the portions assigned by lot to the tribes of Israel by the priest Elazar, Joshua son of Nun, the heads of the ancestral houses, before Hashem at Shiloh at the entrance of the tent of divine meeting. So I think what I really want you to see this inside, because I love this bit where they're like, oh yes, we like portioned out everything according to like this lottery system, this whole complicated thing. But then when we were like, oh, we also have to we also have to bring we also have to like give Yehoshua his own separate one that he asked for. So I think that's actually also really relevant. That it might seem like, oh, in Yehoshua, it's like, yeah, they have the power to do it, but only by this like goral, divinely inspired process. But actually, then Yehoshua asks for a city and they give it to him, and they seem to clearly have the power to do that. But it is kind of interesting that that's not the part that Rabbi Elazar quotes, because it kind of seems a little off. It seems like a little bit not so ethical. The Yehoshua was like, I would like this city for myself, please, and like gets it. And I feel like that, and that's like kind of a bad model for what a Beit Din should follow, I guess, going forward. Like, oh, I'm the Av Beit Din, like I will take Evie's $1 million and allocate it to myself. I think that's probably like a problematic model, even if like maybe it was right for Yehoshua for all kinds of reasons. And you can see all of the different commentators there about that. But yeah. So I think it is like the like text selection as the source there, I think is quite interesting. Gabriel noticed that it's Rabbi Elazar in some places and Rabbi Eliezer in other places. Yes. So if you, and then suggest that it might be a manuscript issue. Yeah. So if you look, I don't know whether you're using an Oz V'Hadar, which is a great type of Gemara that brings in manuscript variants. And it says in the Oz V'Hadar, it says it should say El-Azar. So it's not Rabbi Eliezer, it's Rabbi El-Azar in the according to manuscripts in Gittin. So the Gittin text should be amended to exclude a yud to El-Azar. Okay. So those are our source texts in all of their complexity for Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker. And then an interesting thing happens in Moed Katan. So in Moed Katan, we have this more kind of like big scale theoretical question. Minalan de mafkarina nechse. How do we know that the court can declare property of someone who doesn't obey its orders as ownerless? So when we just want a source for making something that the Beit Din can make something hefker, then why would we bother bringing the texts from Yehoshua that are all about allocation, right? So when we just want a source that the Beit Din is able to make something hefker and not reallocate it as it's doing very clearly in the Yevamot source, right? We're saying, oh, this was supposed to be inherited by these people, but actually it's going to be inherited by those people. That's a reallocation. And most likely in Pruzbol, that's what's happening too, that there's, I'm not supposed to collect it. So I give it to the Beit Din to collect, and then they reallocate it to me. But when we're just talking about the Beit Din's ability to just take money away from people, right? Minalan de mafkarinan, then all we need is the Ezra source, and that's all that's brought there actually. So that's like quite interesting in terms of this question of, well, is this really a debate between Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Elazar, and a kind of different models being put forward by the sources in Ezra, by the Psukim in Ezra versus the Psukim in Yehoshua? We really have some good evidence from Moed Katan that it does seem to be like, yeah, we're really describing different functions, and when we're talking about Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker, what we're really doing is like absorbing two different functions of what we might call like hafka, like making something hefker, or like removing it from someone, and then hakna of giving it to someone else. Those are actually two different things, and actually maybe they require two different sources. So while at first blush it seems like, oh, it's just a debate between Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Elazar, I actually want to submit that I think possibly you actually need both, and in cases where you don't need both, they don't bring both. Okay, so that's where I wanted to go with that. So now we have some other questions about like who can do Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker, and how and like how does it even work? So the Rashba, we'll just look back in the Rashba for a second at source number 7. So he, and we're just going to look at the bolded line, because he quotes he agrees with Rashi for this part, so we don't have to review that. But he says, how does it work? From the Rashi, right? Minash ma'inan dekoach beitin yafa lahafkir mamon mizah ulizakuto lezah afilu kodem shabal yado. Right? Because the other fascinating thing about the Pruzbol is that it still empowers me to go collect my loan from Evie, which is weird. You might think actually like the Beitin should have to be the middle body. Evie should repay the Beitin could give it back to me. And what the Rashba is saying is, no, that's what's amazing about Hefker, Beitin, Hefker. They, even before the money ever touches, even before the Beitin ever touches the money, they can reallocate theoretical future money to someone else. So not only do they have both collection powers and allocation powers, they can allocate before they've collected, which is a very interesting idea of the Rashba there. Okay, so now we're going to go to Maimonides in Mishnah Torah. We're in source 8, and here he's talking about, he's listing out like all the different powers that the Beit Din might have, and it's within this kind of framework that sometimes the Beit Din has to act almost like extrajudicially, like the Beit Din has to act like outside of its mandate. So for those of you familiar with, like, there's a very famous like Drashot Haran, where the Ran talks about, yeah, like actually the Beit Din is so limited, and that's why you have a king, and the king can like make the world an actually a just place. And here's where you see the Rambam saying, no, actually, like the Beit Din can do all of it, because the Beit Din can actually like act outside of the law if they want to. So and that's in that context that he talks about Hefker, Beit Din, Hefker. So here we go. So v'chein yesh dayan tamid. The judge always has the power lahafkir mamon sheyesh lo balim to declare Hefker, to declare ownerless money that has an owner. Ume'abed, he can destroy it, he can take it away, or he can give it away. Venotain kafi mashe'ereh, according to what seems right in his eyes, Ligdor Pirtzot Hadat, to fence up holes in the religion or the religious community, Ulechazik, and to strengthen, and or to fine or whatever, and then he quotes from Ezra for this capability. But that's a very interesting read, right? So it seems like in order for the Rambam to quote from Ezra, when he's both saying that they can take money and they can collect and reallocate, that's a very interesting read, because that seems like he's saying, actually maybe Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Elazar are arguing with each other, because he's only quoting one, and if he's quoting one, he's only quoting Ezra. But I think the reason why the Rambam, if he does think that they're disagreeing, or he does think they're like redundant in some way, would only quote Ezra, because for the Rambam, it's all about hora'at sha'at. It's like there's something really bad going on here and we have to fix it. And that's what's happening in Ezra, meaning Yehoshua, there's something awesome going on here. We've inherited the land, now we're allocating it. That's great life. But in Ezra, it's like there's something going wrong and we're going to use our power to try and stop it. So that's much more in line with what the Rambam is describing here. And just to give you a sense of like other things the Rambam thinks the Beit Din's allowed to do. So in source number 9, this is that same chapter, but later on, says the Dayan can excommunicate someone. And again, for what purpose? Kedei ligdor paretz, right? In order to fence up a hole. And it's all according to Kafi Mashir Alo, according to what seems appropriate to him, and according to Vashat Shricha Lakach, and according to like if the hour calls for it. And he says the Beit Din can get into fights with people and can curse people and can hit people and can even pull out people's hair. Okay, but then he says, we're skipping to the bold part. Kol ilu advarim lefi mashir ad dayan shezeh ro'ui lakach. All of this is according to what the judge sees as being appropriate to him. V'sheh sha'at shricha, the time calls for it. U'v'chol yu ma'asav l'shem shamayim. But all of his actions need to be oriented for the sake of heaven. V'al yeh kvod habriot kal beinav, and he needs to show a lot of respect towards other human beings. And he goes on and on here about like how the Dayan, in using these powers that he is holding and can use Kafi Mashir Elo, he can use according to however he thinks necessary. He still needs to be extremely careful in using these powers. So that's That's the Mishnah Torah. The Ritva also thinks, based on the Rambam, the Ritva in source 10 also thinks that l'kol beitin chashuv b'kol makom b'kol zman. That's the end of that first line, the beginning of the second line. Every important beitin in any place and any time can use the power of hefker beitin hefker. And then we'll just skip to the Shulchan Aruch for a second. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't exactly say it. We're on the back in source 12. Shulchan Aruch doesn't exactly say it. It's really the Ramah who feels very strongly that hefker beitin hefker like lives on today. So if you look in that first bolded parenthetical, that's we typically assume the parentheticals are the Ramah unless we have proof otherwise, but almost always we assume they're the Ramah. He adds in about what a beitin is allowed to do if there's about what kinds of like hora'at sha'ah, like what kinds of rules or actions the beitin is allowed to take in times when they feel endangered, or like the Jewish community is like endangered from within even. And it's the Shulchan Aruch suggests all kinds of violent things, and the Ramah says v'yesh lahem koach la'afkir ma'amono. And the Ramah is the one who adds in, and they can take away people's money. And then if you look further down, we're in the Ramah there again, the hefkeran hefker, that when the beitin declares something hefker, it works. Kafia minhag alpha pishi yesh holkin, but he acknowledges, the Ramah acknowledges that there are people who disagree with him. And he says, no, actually, some people don't think they're allowed to do that. But if like the whole community, but he argues like if the whole community like really supports it, then maybe they can still do it anyways, whatever. But in general, and he concludes mikol makom mochim achar minhag ha'ir. But in general, it seems like the Ramah is like generally quite in favor of hefker beitin hefker existing until today, and the beitin really, yes, having the power to confiscate people's possessions by means of punishment, which is quite interesting. And so, okay, so we're done for today, but come back again next week for more how does Pruzbol work and should we keep it questions. And that's really what we'll be pivoting to, right? So at the beginning, the Gemara we'll look at next week starts Hillel Pruzbol ledari hudatakin odoma ledari alma nami takin. So the question is, okay, well, maybe we took away like this guy's money or money from people in this generation, but can we do that forever? Is there such a thing as a beitin that can enact something like that forever? Is that how this actually works? And remember, we have two different positions on the table about whether Shemitah is de'oraita or derabanan, and then also like what is the function behind Pruzbol. So lots of unclarity that still stands, even though if you can't tell already, I think Rava is very provided today a very strong and interesting answer, and it does seem like he has a lot of good people in his corner as well. Okay, thank you all so much for coming, and Evie, you can close us out.
Okay. Thank you so much for this second session in this series, Rabbanit Sarna. And thank you to everyone who joined us today here on Zoom, on Facebook, and also on Drisha Live. We go live again tomorrow, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern with the fourth class in the session on prayer and the prayer book. The Sidur is a guide to prayerful reflection with Rabbi Silber. In addition, you can always find out information about class offerings as well as the registration links on our website, www.drisha.org/classes, or you can watch classes live at www.drisha.org/live. But we love having you here on Zoom. Thanks again for this opportunity to learn with you, Rabbanit Sarna, and thanks again to everyone who joined us. And I hope to see you soon in one of our upcoming classes here at Drisha.